On today's show, the Hawks have played 41 games. That means it's the halfway point of the season, and there's plenty to discuss, including the latest trade buzz, how Atlanta might fare in the future, and more. And it's coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 2143 of the Locked On Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I'm your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Monday evening into Tuesday here in mid-January. And today's show is sponsored by the folks at Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. And today, we will be spreading the board a little bit when it comes to Hawks topics. A lot to get to in between games. The Hawks are still on the road right now after a 2-0 start on this road trip. And by the way, they're now 6-0 on the West Coast this season. If you missed anything from the game on Sunday or the game on Friday or anything else, please subscribe, catch up in the archives of this podcast. But today, it's the 41 game mark, which is also the halfway point of the season for the Hawks. Most teams are not quite there yet. Atlanta has played more games than any other team in the league to this point, but the Hawks have now finally arrived at that point, so we are halfway home this season. There are 2 more games on this road trip, and we'll talk about Tuesday's game at the end of this podcast. Before that, some trade buzz, also some mailbag questions, and some analysis from what Onsi Saleh had to say earlier today when he addressed the media following the Trae Young trade on Monday afternoon. So we'll begin in the trade market, always a popular topic this time of year with the deadline looming in early February. We're 3 weeks away or so, 3.5 weeks away at this point. So there's a long way to go, but also the Hawks made the first trade of the whole league this season when they moved Trae. So stay tuned for more on that. The biggest name beyond Trae Young that's been tabbed around the Hawks is Anthony Davis. And I get questions about this every day of my life right now. I said this a few times already, but the Hawks, basically with all the stuff going on, I feel the need to drive it home a little bit that some of the reported interest in Anthony Davis, from what I understand and what I'm reporting on from the Hawks side, has been, I would say, greatly sensationalized. Now, I'm not poking fun at any individual report on that, because I know for a fact that, for instance, the Mavs have every reason to be leaking some information about Anthony Davis. Also, AD's agent, Rich Paul, and Clutch are in overdrive on this, which, again, that's them doing their jobs, so no surprise there. But I've been told multiple times by multiple people that Atlanta's interest is existing basically in a limited fashion for Anthony Davis. And if the price drops way down and they can grab him for what they believe to be a big bargain, they might be interested in that. But there's this notion that the Hawks are hot on the trail of Anthony Davis. I've not heard that really at all in recent days. And look, that's my reporting side. Personally, on the analyst side of things, the price for me could not get low enough right now, given where AD's contract is. I'm not in charge, nor am I making decisions, but that's where I would be. And I've said that already on this podcast, but I would say that even more now with AD injured, because he's going to be out for a while. There's some uncertainty as to how much he's going to miss, but he's going to be out for a little while here, and that does matter to some degree. And by the way, if he's out for the next 2 months, I have a hard time seeing him be traded anywhere, because why would a team trade for him right now? Part of the appeal of a player who is AD's age, he'll be 33 pretty soon, is to help you win at a high level this season. If he's going to be out for 2-3 more months or longer, that takes a lot of the appeal away for a guy whose contract is going to get worse and worse, honestly. So I do believe that the Hawks do make total sense from the Dallas side and the agent side as a stalking horse for trade interest in Anthony Davis. But again, everything I've heard so far is that the notion that the Hawks are over the moon about him is just not the case right now. In a related story, Mark Stein, a real insider, was asked on a podcast over the weekend if any team has made a real offer to Dallas just yet, or whether Mavericks have had the chance to trade AD at some point. And Stein said, quote, "To my knowledge, no," end quote. So that speaks to the fact that the market is not hot and heavy on AD right now, to the point where Dallas would want to trade him, because they're going to at least try to get a real return for him, which makes sense. He's signed for the next couple of seasons, and they're kind of in this weird in-between space right now. Maybe this all will change, but with AD out and all that stuff, I may not do much more on AD until the deadline, because I would need some more reporting and some more intel, and also him to be healthy for me to be like, all right, let's talk about this again, because right now it's quieter in my understanding than it is in some of the more sensational aggregated headlines. Also, on the trade front, McCollum and Kispert cannot be aggregated with anything else in a trade, because of the way the Hawks did the deal with Washington, they can be traded individually. So you could still turn around and trade Kispert for something else, McCollum for something else, but not with anything else, not with another player, exceptions or whatever, nothing else like that. So for example, it's been topical on AD. I've seen even fake trades, people that just don't have this correct. The Hawks cannot trade for AD using McCollum or Kispert because they do not make enough to match with AD, and they have to be put together. And again, they can't be put together. So keep that in mind. It basically has only one way to get to AD's money in a 2-team deal with Dallas with the Hawks right now. It's Porzingis and then either Kennard or Ricochet. And I think Ricochet is not going to be in that trade. So Porzingis and Kennard, yes, that matches the salary to some degree, but that's not what I would be looking to do if I was the Hawks. Another name that's kind of made the rounds a little bit in the last couple of hours and days is Jaren Jackson Jr. Now, to be very clear, my friend Jake Fisher reported on this over the weekend. He wrote the following. Numerous rival executives have been whispering about Jackson all season, and then he also said, quote, one inevitably wonders whether teams like Toronto and Atlanta, previously confirmed service for Anthony Davis, will attempt to test Memphis's resolve for keeping Jackson, end quote. So, a couple things here. Jaren Jackson Jr. is very good. I'd also be quite surprised if this ended up being a real thing on the Hawks side. Now, for one thing, Memphis may not trade him. They just extended him and have prioritized him above everybody else on that roster. But this is not a thing right now. I read that wording in particular on purpose because Jake could not have written that any softer. It's rival executives speculating and literally just wondering aloud. One inevitably wonders whether teams. Like, that's not reporting at all on what the Hawks actually would do before you even get to anything on the Memphis side. So this is not a trade rumor or anything close to that right now. Jaren, again, may not be available at this point, much less the Hawks have an interest in getting down the line on this trade. It's tricky also because Jaren can play some center, and he has in the past, but he's really better at the 4, defensively in particular, and the Hawks have an all-star guy at the 4 in Jalen Johnson already. Now, they could play together. I'm not saying they couldn't. Jalen and Jaren could play together. No question about that. But going basically all in on Jaren Jackson would be a massive investment, and it would be pretty risky to do so, assuming he's going to play center most of the time. I would not be like, he's a good player. I would obviously call on him, but it's not like a slam dunk fit is what I would say. For one thing, Jaren is a terrible rebounder. Like that's his number one weakness in all of aspects is his rebounding is really bad, always has been. It was bad in college. He's one of the worst rebounding bigs in the entire league. Now, he's still a really good defender. That's a real weakness that the Hawks would have some trouble papering over. Also, his shot blocking's down the last couple of years. When he was kind of the defensive player of the year, conversations actually won it once. And so are his overall defensive metrics. Now, he's improved on offense, which does matter. He's still good defensively, but he's not special maybe at this point, and getting older, and is not hugely physical and rugged either. So he's made a leap on offense for sure. I think he's pretty universally seen like it's like a top 50 player in the league, but more in that 30 to 50 range than actually like top 25, for example. And I note that because he has 4 years left on a huge extension after this. $49 million next year, then 51, 52, and then a player option 53.5 in 29-30. So it's a lot of money for Jaren Jackson Jr. I'm not even entirely sure that's a hugely positive value contract. We've seen around the league. It happened with Trae. It's happening with John Morant. They're different players, but like around the league, the theme right now, beyond small guards, and small guards are getting played off in a lot of different ways. That's definitely part of this too. But what teams are realizing that they really can't do is pay max money for non-max players. That's going to kill you in the current landscape of the league. And Jaren is probably a max player, but will he be in 2 or 3 years? We don't really know. And I'm not sure that's a guaranteed value contract. So being shrewd on that matters for these giant deals for non-elite players. And it's a pretty fine line to walk. So I'll stop there. This is not a rumor at this point in time, but I got questions about it today, and Jake wrote about it and mentioned the Hawks. Anytime you have player X and Hawks in the same report, it ends up on Hoops Hype and Hoops Rumors and all these places, and NBA Central, all these, and I get why, but this is not a rumor at this point. I want to touch on it quickly, but we are miles away from this being an actual thing at all, and I personally would not be itching to get into it as the Hawks at this point, even if he does come available, and that's a big if at this point as well. Now, in a second, I'll talk about some Daniel Gafford reporting that actually was more directly around the Hawks, plus some actual on-court stuff when it comes to how the Hawks might play in the second half. Well, Onsi said today, on Monday afternoon and more. It's coming up in just one moment. Basketball is here. There's nothing like being in the actual building for a basketball game. The energy, the crowd, and the big runs that actually get everybody on their feet and excited. They just want to be there for the moments, and they don't want to be stuck refreshing screens or giving kind of guessing what tickets might actually cost them. And that's where the Gametime app comes into play. At Gametime, the app gives fans the advantage back, making it incredibly easy to score amazing tickets, fast, simple, without any of the guesswork of buying those tickets. Browsing the Gametime app is straightforward. It's intuitive. You can find tickets for just a few taps of your screen. You can see the actual view from the seats before you buy the tickets, and that also makes everything better and actually allows you to be confident in the entire process. Prices include fees up front, so the total is really clear from the start. And they have features like zone deals that actually unlock great seats at even better values, whether it's an NBA game or a football game, baseball, etc. They also have theater, concerts, all that fun stuff. Everything is right there for you in one place at Gametime. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA. That's LOCKEDON NBA, code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Download the Gametime app today and get in on the action. Finding a doctor that you actually like can be like discovering a diamond in the rough. You want someone who's in your network, nearby with availability, but you also want a doctor who really listens, makes you feel comfortable, explains things clearly, and helps you walk out the door feeling confident about your next steps. Your diamond in the rough doctor exists, and you can actually find them, and really it's easy to do so with Zocdoc. Zocdoc is a free app and website that helps you find and book quality in-network doctors so you can actually find someone that you can actually connect with in that practice. I love you actually search for specialties or symptoms or quickly find the right fit for you all in one place. Being able to choose in-person or video visits makes scheduling way easier for you as well. You can check the verified patient reviews to get a real sense of the doctor's vibe and communication style. And they have real-time availability, which means you can book instantly with no playing of phone tag. Appointments actually happen within 24 to 72 hours most of the time, and they can even have the same day openings on occasion. If I need to book care fast, this is the first place that I would go. It just makes the entire process very simple. Stop putting off those doctor's appointments and go to ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNBA to find and instantly book a doctor that you absolutely love today. That's ZocDoc, ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNBA. One more time, the place to go is ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNBA. And thanks to Zocdoc for sponsoring this message. Thank you, as always, making Locked On Hawks your first listen each and every day. If you ever want to go ad-free, you can also do so right now by joining the Everydayer Club today. Go to lockedonhawks.supercast.com to learn more. And as I said before, another center kind of came up in the mix of the reporting over the weekend, and this one's a little bit more real than the Jaren Jackson stuff is, and that's Daniel Gafford of the Mavericks. Mark Stein reported that, quote, Atlanta is said to have some interest, end quote, in Daniel Gafford. He also mentioned Indiana and Boston in pursuit potentially of the 27-year-old center from the Mavericks. He's a very dependent offensive player, lob threat, play finisher type. You've seen this year by the numbers, by the eye test, that he's not the same guy offensively when he doesn't have a player to set him up in the way that Luka used to, or even Kyrie used to in Dallas. His turnover rate's way up this year, for example. Lob finisher, very low usage player. It doesn't do a ton else on offense other than rebound and finish, but he's actually good there as well. He's very efficient, always been very efficient, kind of a traditional rim runner center type. Takes like a lot of shots at the rim, basically. Can't shoot, doesn't really want to shoot. That's all fine. Defensively, a good shot blocker for sure. Not a bad rebounder at all, but like not a great one for a center. And this year, his numbers are down as a defender in the advanced numbers. Going back before that, he's been pretty average, and not in a bad way. Like an average defender at center is totally fine, and a lot of catch-alls. But Gafford is a good player. I would describe Daniel Gafford as a low-end starter or a high-end backup. Like that's a top 40 kind of center in the league. Good player. Contractually, he has 3 years left after this, which is a long time for a center. It's not a bad contract. He signed an extension with Dallas a few months ago. It's about $17 million next year, then 18 and then 19 in the last season. In 28-29, he'll be 30 that season. So that's not crazy, but it's a long-term deal. It's not like a guaranteed positive. I think he'd actually be a better fit if the Hawks were trying to stick it out with Trae Young, but that's not happening anymore, obviously, because of what I said before. He needs to be set up, and the Hawks have good passing on the roster still, but not like a typical, pick and roll guy to run stuff with Gafford. But he still should be on the board as a target for the Hawks, because the Hawks need another center for next year in particular. This is where it becomes kind of interesting, because right now, the Hawks do need a third center. I said that a lot this year. As soon as N'Faly Dante got hurt, the Hawks were in a spot where they needed a third center on the roster because KP is not always available. In fact, he's not playing on Tuesday, for example. And I get why the Mavs might want to trade Gafford. They have Derek Lively and AD. So if they have all three of those guys, I get why that's not what you would want to ideally do. Plus, they have Flag and all that stuff as well. From a Hawks standpoint, though, it might be tricky, not impossible, but tricky to trade for Gafford during this season if they wanted him, because you could still do it. I'm not saying you couldn't by any means, but now you kind of have too many centers. Like, he's kind of overqualified for what the Hawks' role is, and for the contract that you have him on, he can't be one of three centers. If you're paying Daniel Gafford $17, $18, $19 million, he needs to be your second center, not your third center, for example. It'd be great to have Gafford this year on nights when KP's not available, for sure. But when he is available, Gafford is now either your 2A, 2B with a Kongu or whatever, making a lot of money, and that just wouldn't be like the best use of resources necessarily. But it's not a shot at Gafford. He's a good player. He's, again, overqualified and overpaid for the role this year. If KP leaves in free agency or gets traded, suddenly you have a Kongu and Gafford in the roles they should be in. That's basically like a 1A, 1B center. Like, both those guys are best suited as a tandem of center. I love a Kongu. I've talked about him a lot this year. And I've also said, ideally, he's playing like 27 minutes a game, not 34 minutes a game. And with Gafford on the team, you can actually do that. So I think having a Kongu and Gafford moving forward would actually make a lot of sense. It'd be very reasonable. I don't know if they have to do that, but it's an interesting thought. I also heard a little bit after this came out on the intel side that it might be a little bit outdated. Like, potentially it was more like if the Hawks didn't trade Trae, they would have wanted Gafford. I don't know that for sure, but I heard a little bit of a rumbling of that today. Also, you have to match salary. And to make a deal happen, you could trade Kispert for Gafford straight up. That does work. Kispert can't be aggregated, but it could be that 1-for-1 deal. You could trade Kennard for Gafford. That'd be the way to do it in the short term. Or maybe there's a bigger deal if you wanted to do like KP for PJ Washington and Gafford. That's trickier for sure. But anyway, there's ways to do it. The Hawks have to send something out. Like, you can't just add Gafford for nothing. That he does cost a lot of money. So that's a big TBD, but it is a player that was actually reported for the Hawks might have interest in, which makes it more serious right now than anything with Jaren Jackson happened to be. All right. Changing gears a little bit, but also looking backwards briefly here. Onsi Saleh talked to the media on Monday afternoon for the first time since the trade. And it was his first like post-trade availability, all that stuff. It was on Zoom. He's actually in LA right now, so he couldn't talk to the entire Atlanta media from there. I did put the audio and video in the feeds of Locked On Hawks. So if you did not listen to that or watch it, I recommend go ahead and doing that. It's like 17 minutes long. And it's, Onsi being Onsi. He's very process-oriented, not the most like, he's not going to give you a ton, but also he is smart. You can tell that if you listen to him. And also he believes what he's saying. Some guys just kind of do the speak to say the speak. Honestly, he's not going to tell you his entire plan because no GM's going to do that, but he actually does believe what he's saying, which does matter. Nothing hugely revelatory as far as like news are concerned. He did want to talk about how the deal went down, for example. He spoke very highly of Kispert and McCollum. By the way, he has every reason to do that. I think it's both true and also like you're never going to not do that if you're the GM of the team. He did acknowledge that future planning and flexibility and optionality was a big part of the deal when I asked about that aspect of the trade. So listen to all that. But anyway, that's the backdrop of this. There's some post-trade trade discourse and housekeeping that I want to get to quickly here. I mentioned this briefly on the initial reaction episode last week, but Brian Windhorst of ESPN on his podcast flat out reported that the Wizards wanted to get off of Kispert's contract, and it was viewed as a sweetener in the deal that the Hawks would take him back. That is not like it's not a disaster deal, but I referenced that at the time. Kispert can play, but it's not a contract that people are loving because it's pretty long, and that deal is like not like totally bad underwater, but it's not a great one, which is part of why there's a little bit of pushback and why I graded the deal a little bit lower on the day of. Also, I brought up Toronto as a potential trade suitor before the deal happened, and then Jake Fisher added some reporting to that, which is relevant after today because he said and reported that the Raptors had interest and actually made an offer built around Emmanuel Quickley a year ago during last season. And then he also said that they maintained interest in Trae this year. But it is not surprising at all, if you listen to this podcast or just listen to Onsi or read stuff, that the Hawks were not interested in doing that. because Quickly is not a bad player. He's actually a good player, but he makes a lot of money. And I think that's a sub equal contract. Like it's a negative value contract, we'll say. And if Toronto wanted to pay a crazy price in draft capital, then maybe. But I think that Onsi has actually the way Jake put it is actually very smart and on brand. Jake wrote that Onsi and the front office have, quote, staunchly prioritized, end quote, the flexibility that they actually have more of now post trade. It quickly would have gone against that. He actually has like $100+ million left after this. So good player. That's not worth going into that deep, but it's a good example of what the Hawks were looking for in a trade. They did not want to take back long-term money that they thought was underwater. Now, Kispert, you could say is underwater, but not in a way that's like $30+ million a year like Quickly was. So there's all that stuff. Last thing on the transactional buzzy front, the Hawks don't have a roster spot anymore, which people have, I think, kind of forgotten. I've had people calling for stuff. It's like, no, the Hawks actually have a full roster now. They have a two-way spot open after they waived Malik Williams, but that's not the same thing. A lot of guys are not eligible for two ways. Now, I would also note that if the Hawks really wanted to go ahead and do something with a roster spot, they could definitely create one without too much pain. For me, it would be in this order. I would cut Juricic first. I think that he's likely to not be on the roster next year. If I had to guess right now, he's also making the least money, so you have to pay him, but it's nothing crazy. He'd be an easy cut. You have Mfawe Dante, who they do want to keep because he's actually on a 2 years after this non-guaranteed deal. It could be very friendly to the Hawks, but he's also out for the season, so it would not blow me away if they cut him. And look, Keaton Wallace is a player that they've needed this year, but with McCollum now around, with Kennard playing better, they don't necessarily have to have Keaton Wallace. So if they had to or wanted to create a spot, they definitely could. But at the moment, as a PSA, they do not have a roster spot available at this very moment. That could change between now and the deadline. Okay, in a second, I have a mailbag question that's actually directly tied to how the Hawks might perform in the second half of the season, because now we've officially arrived at the second half being literally starting tomorrow in Los Angeles. We'll get into that and more in just one moment.
You know, I carry a lot of responsibility in my household. If something happened to me, there would be serious consequences. We have a mortgage, we got tuition, we got everyday bills. Those aren't going anywhere if something happens to me. And I know that's an overwhelming feeling, but I'm taking steps to protect my family by getting life insurance through Ethos. Ethos makes getting life insurance fast, easy, and 100% online. You can get a quote in seconds, apply in minutes, and get same-day coverage. There's no medical exam. You just answer a few simple health questions. You can get up to $3 million in coverage. Some policies are as low as $30 a month. And as of March 2025, Business Insider named Ethos the #1 no medical exam instant life insurance provider. Ethos has 4.8 out of 5 stars on Trustpilot with over 3,000 reviews. Protect your family with life insurance from Ethos now by going to ethos.com/LocdownNBA. In as little as 10 minutes, you can get your free quote and up to $3 million in coverage at ethos.com/LocdownNBA. That's ethos.com/LocdownNBA. Ethos.com/LocdownNBA. Application times and rates may vary.
All right, actually 2 questions that I'll answer kind of in tandem. One is from David on my Patreon. That's patreon.com/BT Rowland. He says, when you say that the season is not the priority anymore, what do you mean by that? With 3 straight wins, it feels like the Hawks are cooking again. That's one question. And then Ray asks on Twitter, what would you guess the Hawks' record will be in the second half of the season? These 2 things are actually very much intertwined. So a question that I wanted to answer, it's like, I did say this, the priority anymore, I should say, was this season. I said that on the podcast, also wrote it on my Patreon. To be very clear, this season does still matter. And I'm not saying it doesn't by any means. I know that it does. I haven't changed that. I've said it before. This season matters to some degree. That was one of the very interesting parts of the Hawks trading Trae Young for the package they got back and how they approached it, because, yes, I do believe, and Onsi literally said this today, that it was, at least in part, and I would add, he didn't say this, I would add in large part because of future optionality, flexibility, all that stuff. But he did say it was part of it. That's part of it. But they also get McCollum and Kispert back that can play for you now. And that was appealing to the Hawks on some level. Because if the Hawks were 14-27 right now, having McCollum doesn't really do much for you. If the Hawks are trying to make the playoffs this year, which they are, he can very much help you do that. Like, I think CJ is not like an elite player by any means, but he's definitely a good rotation level player who has real strengths. And also, they could resign him. Onsi was asked today about that. He kind of downplayed it, as you might expect him to do, but that's a possibility as well. Even if they don't, there is clear value in having McCollum and Kispert on the team this year, which is part of the deal with the Hawks. With that said, I do maintain that this season is not the priority right now. I've gotten pushback on this. I get why, because I have said and will say that the East is wide open. That is true in my opinion. The Hawks could catch fire in the second half and make the Final Four, even make the finals. That would not blow me away. It's not a 0% chance. The Hawks have a chance to get hot and the talent to do that, and the East is that wide open at this point in time. But is that likely to happen? Probably not. It's possible. I'm not saying ignore it, but it does matter where the Hawks kind of stack up right now. So what I'm saying is, any trade they make or pursue or discuss that is significant, not like a second rounder for a whatever, like a real trade where you're giving up real stuff, needs to prioritize the future as much as, or really for me, more than the present. Because the Hawks, I believe, are firmly better than their record right now. Atlanta's 20-21. Like, systems like EPM and BPI agree with me on this, and the betting odds do as well. The Hawks, for me, are better than that. FanDuel right now, by the way, as a sidebar, has an updated over-under win total on the Hawks. It's 42.5 wins. I would go over on that with a pretty good amount of conviction. Now, I'm not saying they're going to win 50 games, because that would be finishing 30-11. That's not impossible. That's hard to ask for. It could swing some based on KP's availability. He's going to be out again Tuesday. That's not going to be great. But if you combine the current roster with where they are right now and one of the easiest schedules in the league. Last week I did this whole segment about this. I won't do it long again here, but the schedule is very, very favorable from now on, especially once they get home and get through Boston. Starting basically a week from today, they have like number 1 or number 2 schedule in the entire league. That doesn't guarantee anything, but it should be a factor in how you project the team moving forward. Because so far, they've had a brutal schedule, and they've actually been able to hold up against that schedule. So for me, I'd have the Hawks at like 45 wins, which may not sound like a lot, but that's actually going 25-16 from this point forward. That's a 50-win pace. That's a very much an outcome for this team when you factor in the talent level and the schedule and all that. That's a good team. What it is not is a Oklahoma City, Houston, San Antonio, Denver level team right now. Could be with a trade or two. I'm not saying it couldn't be, but they got older by adding CJ, which I know that Onsi kind of acknowledged. But before that, they were third youngest team in the league. And they have an excellent salary cap situation for the future. They had the Pelicans-Bucks pick. They have an extra pick next year from Pelicans-Bucks. The future and the Hawks situation is set up very, very well. It just is. Is that like a guarantee of anything? No. But the chances of the Hawks being a title contender, and I don't mean that lightly, a title contender in 2 or 3 years is higher than it is this year. I feel strongly about that. So prioritizing the future over the present is what I would be doing right now. That doesn't mean, again, the present still matters, but if you're giving me the choice between now and 2 years from now, I choose 2 years from now in the Hawks mindset at the moment. So the Hawks could certainly believe about buying. Like, they could certainly buy on the market right now in the next 3.5 weeks. I'm not saying that they should stop making trades. I'm not saying that. But if you're going to go buy on the market, it needs to be a player that can help you beyond the season, in my opinion. Now, if you want to try a second round pick for a guy who can help you this year, that's not crazy at all. But if you're going to trade a first rounder or a real piece of your team moving forward, it needs to matter a lot in the future. So if they do buy, don't push assets in to have a short-term focus. And I believe Onsi used the term today that they're not going to be doing quick fixes this year, which I definitely would subscribe to. That was not my notes because it was not, I wrote the notes before I actually listened to the interview today. That's on brand, and I agree with it 100%. So I'm pretty confident from what Onsi has said, what I've heard, the kind of thinker he is, that he has a long-term vision for the Hawks. I'm not worried about the Hawks losing their minds and going crazy in the short term unless Tony Ressler gets very involved in a bad way. Onsi is a smart long-term thinker. So my overall point is the next few weeks matters, but keeping the long-term at the forefront is kind of what I would do. And hopefully that answers the question to some degree. And also answers the other one, because the Hawks are going to win more than they lose the rest of the year. I'm pretty confident in that, and we'll see how many wins they actually can get over the next 41 games. Speaking of which, the Hawks play again on Tuesday evening. It is the latest tip-off time of the entire season. Roughly 10:40 p.m. Eastern on a Tuesday. That is disgusting if you're on the East Coast. I will be up, obviously, covering the game because I covered the team. So it'll be a 3 a.m. night for me. Hopefully not that late for everybody else. But if you can't stay up, I totally get it. And I will be doing that for you. So the podcast will be there for you in the morning. With that said, it's a back-to-back with travel for Los Angeles. So it's a good spot for the Hawks situationally. Now, you're still playing a road game against a pretty good team. But LA, as many have chronicled, the Lakers actually have a net rating that's nowhere near their record. So I'm recording this podcast before they actually play tonight. But right now, they're 23-13 with like a net rating of like a 16-17 win team. So they've been pretty fortunate on the margins this year. They still have talent. They're playing the Kings tonight. So you may know how this game went. I don't know how the game went tonight. But regardless, it's a situational advantage for the Hawks. Now, the injury report is out. It's a busy one in a not great way for the Hawks. They have 3 guys questionable and 2 guys out. So on the outside, obviously, one of them is N'Faly Dante. But Porzingis is actually going to be out already. That's a downgrade for him. He was questionable on Sunday, didn't play, but was questionable and then ruled out. This time he's just out. It's the left Achilles tendonitis. I know Kevin Chenard, who was actually in Denver on Friday, said he was testing it out. So I know people have been saying, "Oh, it's the illness." No, this is an actual injury for KP. I don't know I don't know when he'll be back. I don't want to guess. I don't know the answer, but he's going to be out for Tuesday. Then there are 3 guys questionable. 2 of them are not surprising. Kennard, who had the neck sprain on Sunday. I know he was awesome after that, but he's questionable after suffering that during the game on Sunday. And then Asa Newell left the game in the second half with a right quad contusion. He's also questionable for the game on Tuesday. The upgrade and the small positive here is that Ricochet has now been listed as questionable. He was out flat on Sunday. So that's a step forward for him. But the Hawks also changed the listing on his injury. Now it's a left knee bone contusion for Ricochet. Previously, it was left knee inflammation. So that, in my mind, that means they got an MRI back. They didn't say this. I'm interpreting, not reporting, guessing, but educated guessing, that they got an MRI back that explained what the injury was, and then he was upgraded to questionable. So that's, I don't know if he'll play on Tuesday, but that's at least a small win that he was not like, hey, just out at this point in time. So lots of questions about what's going to happen when everybody plays. And I asked them one of the questions last night. It was like, hey, keep in mind, you're playing Kennard and Veit and Kispert, but you didn't have Ricochet or Porzingis. So it's going to get full in a hurry in rotation. And by the way, that's a good problem to have. But for now, at least KP will not be available on Tuesday. And that means I would guess it means a healthy dose of Mo Gay. And then we'll see if Asa Newell is available. If Asa can't play, you're down to your entire front court is Onyeka, Mo, and Jalen. That would be it. That's tough. Not impossible to navigate, but pretty tough. So we'll see. Anyway, we don't have a betting line yet at FanDuel because the Lakers literally play tonight. So stay tuned for that. But it's definitely a winnable game. I would say this is a better spot than Sunday. And Sunday, they won handily over Golden State. So that doesn't always mean anything. But the Lakers are a team the Hawks already beat once this year, pretty convincingly, and when they were both shorthanded early in the year. And I think the Hawks are more than capable of knocking off this Lakers team. By the way, in that first meeting, Mo Gay had the best game of his career on offense. I think he had like 21 points in that game. It was awesome. So hopefully that repeats itself if you're a Hawks fan on Tuesday. But again, I'll have full coverage of that game. When it transpires, it'll be like a 2 a.m. or so recording time. So please stay tuned for that. And please subscribe to Locked on Hawks anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, YouTube, etc. Follow the show on X/Twitter at Locked on Hawks. Follow me on Twitter and Blue Sky if you want to at BT Rowland. And then my non-podcast coverage of the Hawks can be found at patreon.com/BT Rowland. All right, everybody, enjoy the rest of your Monday evening into Tuesday, and we'll see you all after a very late night game on Tuesday night.